Tonight, the countdown begins. Hoosier Hot Takes, 3 bold predictions for the 2025 Indiana football season. The Hoosier Tailgate, with Coach Griff, joins forces with the writers from thehoosier.com to deliver insights, drama, and predictions that could define the Hoosier season. The Hoosier Tailgate starts now.
And picked up the sideline. Indiana, Asbury, walking them down. Woo! IU, America, they got a football team now.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Hoosier Football Tailgate here on thehoosier.com. That's right, bold predictions for 2025 and roundtable discussions with my friends at thehoosier.com, or I should say co-workers at thehoosier.com. We're going to bring those fellas in right now. We've got Drew Rosenberg, Colin McMahon, and Zach Browning. You get all their articles as well as podcasts each and every day, week, month, year, you name it. These three are on it for the Hoosier.com as well as Indiana football. They will take us through each and every game, whether it be at home or away. You can bet one of these two, 3 of them, maybe, be covering the Indiana Hoosiers this year. Want to welcome you guys all in. Drew, why don't you start off? Just kind of give us a little background so we get everybody else familiar with us as well as we get ready to kick this 2025 season off.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Drew. I've been covering the IU football and basketball for 3 years from now. Graduated from IU in 24 and, joined the Hoosier when, made the switch to On3 with Alec and Kyler, and been hosting the Talking About the Hoosiers podcast, which Zach is also on with me, and Colin's made an appearance. Shannon, got to get you on there soon. But been hosting that for 3 years now, too.
Yeah, great to have you again here. Colin, let's go to you right now with some background.
Yeah, I'm junior at the IU Media School. Zach and I last year covered IU athletics for the Hoosier.com over when we were at Rivals. And then obviously we've made the switch to On3. It's been great. And be sure to check out all of our coverage, not just football, basketball, baseball as well. Soccer just started, so we really do have it all.
That's correct. I should have added that you got it covered each and every sport A to Z, irregardless of the season. You can count on the Hoosier.com. Zach, kind of fill us in on your background too.
Yeah, this is my 3rd year covering the Hoosiers, both football, basketball, baseball, you name it. 3rd year on the beat for that. I'm a senior. This is my last go around at IU. I'm a student here at IU, and I do some broadcasting on the side as well. But again, we have all the coverage over at thehoosier.com, all the coverage that you ever need when it comes to IU athletics.
That's right. And if you haven't gotten a subscription to thehoosier.com, get over there now. $1 off for the first month, 50% off for the rest of the year, as we do not know when that will end. And you not only get your coverage there at thehoosier.com and On3 for everything, and Rivals with their recruiting site as well, but you also get a year subscription to Athlon, right? And all the coverage you get through them, both basketball, college football, you name it, NFL. So it's a great deal for $1 and 50% off for the rest of the year. Also want to thank our sponsor for this evening, Academy Sports and Outdoors. You can get, it's a priority, is free assembly, free curbside pickup, credit card at Academy Sports and Outdoors. We carry all the gear you need from the top brands, all at the prices you'll love. Now shopping at Academy is more convenient than ever. We offer free assembly on in-store purchases of most bikes and grills, plus free and easy curbside pickup on an academy.com orders. When to save even more every day. Open and use an Academy Sports and Outdoors credit card to get 5% off future purchases. And when you're approved, save and add money at Academy Sports and Outdoors and have fun out there. We want to thank those for that as well. And of course, you guys joining me here at the Hoosier Tailgate on the Hoosier.com. Hey, man, the 25 season is upon us. The talking season is over, and the Indiana Hoosiers and Coach Cignetti maybe can get out from under the ire of media folk from north, south, east, and west, may I say just south, about scheduling and everything else that's going on in college football. The SEC moves to nine conference games here in a year, so it's kind of like all in checkmate as it pertains to the SEC and Big Ten. So stay tuned for coverage and all that as it pertains to the college football playoffs. But tonight, I think we just want to get ourselves mentally prepared on what to expect out of this 2025 football team. And when you look at it from a year ago at this time, there was a lot of unknowns. There was a lot of assumptions. Everything that we looked at the calendar when it came to scheduling, we understood that the first 3 games of the season were going to be good. Not great test for Indiana. Good, solid matchups there the first week, especially. But then you got into the gauntlet of Nebraska and Washington and not thinking that Indiana was going to run the gauntlet, so to speak, to a 6-0 start. So tonight we want to get everybody out there in Hoosier land, so to speak, prepared, and maybe what we think we're going to see from this Indiana football season this year. But our first hot take, as I get everyone's feeling on this, and kind of go around the horn again. But who is going to be your breakout prediction player-wise this year? A lot of new faces. Again, Fernando Mendoza is the easy pick, so we can all agree that's one of them. But at the end of the day, who is that person or, the player that you think may be one of those guys that has a breakout year? And Zach, we'll start with you.
I'm going to go with a wide receiver here, and this is not necessarily a newcomer, although it can technically classify as a newcomer. I'm going to go with EJ Williams. He didn't get a ton of playing time last season, obviously dealt with some issues as far as injuries are concerned, but I think EJ Williams, this is going to be now his 6th season of college football, and I think the former top 75, top 60 recruit finally has that breakout year. I think he's going to be wide receiver 3 heading into the season for Indiana alongside Omar Cooper and alongside Elijah Surratt. But I think EJ Williams, we all know the talent's there. That's kind of the big thing with EJ Williams. He has all the talent in the world, a former 4-star recruit out of high school. He went to Clemson, spent 3 years there, didn't really ever get his college career off the ground at Clemson, transferred to IU, more of the same. And he's dealt with injuries pretty much throughout his entire career, guys. But this fall, this summer, this offseason, it's been different. This is the healthiest he's been entering a season pretty much in his entire career. And I know Curt Cignetti said it last week. He said EJ has a lot of talent and ability to make plays. He showed it late last season. He came on late in that season for Indiana in 2023, 2 years ago, I should say. And I think this season, he finally puts it all together. The health, the talent, I think it finally all comes together. And I think EJ Williams has a breakout season at wide receiver for Indiana, providing Fernando Mendoza with a much-needed third option in that receiving corps.
And no question on a receiver that can take off the top and be a threat in that high red zone as Indiana approaches the score zone as much as they did last year, scoring 80% of the time 6 points. So adding that weapon, I can totally see your point on that one, Zach. Colin, let's go to you. Who is that guy for you that think is going to be that breakout player?
I'm going to go to the defensive side of the ball, and I'm going to take sophomore linebacker Elijah Hardy. Last year he played 13 games as a freshman. You don't really see that too often anymore, playing every single game as a true freshman, and it wasn't like he just got in there and took some reps. He really played well, and I think that he's matured a lot physically and mentally, and he's learned from Aiden Fisher, and truly, there's no better linebacker in the country to learn from than Aiden Fisher. He's just a world-class leader. Cignetti goes on and on about how important Aiden Fisher is to the team, and I think it's going to rub off on Elijah Hardy. Hardy's not the most vocal guy out there, but he's a high football IQ guy. He knows what he's doing out there. He's physically mature for a true sophomore, and I think he's really going to put it all together. He had a pick 6 in the spring game. He can be active in pass defense, but also in rush defense. He can also get after the quarterback. And so I think him alongside Fisher, he and Fisher are going to put together a very good 1-2 punch in that linebacker position, and with some studs on the front four on the defensive line, and then some really good players in the defensive back room. I think that the linebackers are going to kind of be the glue for that Indiana defense, and Elijah Hardy will be as important as any player on the Indiana roster. Replacing Jalen Walker isn't going to be easy, but I think he's up for the task, and I think he's really going to break out this season.
Well, he absolutely has the talent and speed to mimic what Walker brought to the table a year ago, and a defense this year, most think maybe even better of a defense from a season ago. And that's a pretty tall task with a defense that was ranked nationally within the top 5 in a lot of categories. So I can see Hardy being that guy and ready to step into that role with a lot of confidence as well. Drew, let's head to you, my man. Who do you look like for this year as that top cat?
Yeah, so Colin kind of stole my pick. I was going to go for Elijah Hardy, so I'm going to pivot to the offensive side of the football. I'm going to go a wide receiver who has kind of established himself as that number 2 guy already, but I think he takes another step. It's Omar Cooper Jr. We've seen the big plays after the catch. Indiana clearly last year made it a point of emphasis to get him the ball in space. 2 carries, had a rushing touchdown against Michigan State. He's a guy with the balls in his hand. He can make plays. He can also go up and climb the ladder and make those explosive catches. And with Fernando Mendoza, the arm talent is there. And we've talked all offseason about the connection with Elijah Surratt and how great it's going to be for Surratt to have Mendoza. But I think it's going to be equally beneficial for Omar Cooper Jr., just someone who can really, take those deep shots down the field. And when the play breaks down, find Omar Cooper in space and let him make something happen.
Well, that is a great pick, too, as last year he was a valuable player making big-time plays in a limited role in some respects as a backup. But every time there was a big play to be needed, it always seemed to be Omar making it. For whatever reason, it just, Rourke found him quite a bit in clutch situations. So I agree with that as well. For me, you think I'm an offensive guy, former quarterback coach, all that good stuff, man. Defense wins championships, man. And I'm going to go with the guy they got through the transfer portal. I've been saying this since the day that they got him. Kellen Wyatt from Maryland, the transfer senior. Edge player, can put his hand down. He can also flip to the other side if needed, if Kamara needs a blow or whatever. But he's got the ability to play about 2 different positions. But I like this kid. I like his motor. I like the way he's played. Last year against Indiana, I think he had 4 pressures and 2 pass breakups or sacks. I can't get a total picture there from a game against Maryland a year ago, but he's the guy that flashed at that game for me. And when Indiana picked him up, I thought, man, oh man, that's a steal, because I think he has the ability to elevate this defense and be a defense that can get pressure with 4. And that will be so critical as the year goes on. And look, we're picking 1. We could have sat here and picked 5 or 6 other spots, including in the O-line and in the running back room, because that is loaded with guys that are going to be in their first year with Indiana in a lot of respects. But I agree with everyone's statements there about each player. I do believe that Indiana has quite a few guys that could rise to the occasion each and every week and be that breakout player. Hot take number 2 for the evening: defining a defining game prediction. We have heard it all year long. The schedule. Last year, easy. It wasn't a record. Strength of record wasn't great. The strength of schedule wasn't great. And you play 3 cupcakes, and Ole Miss should have got in over you in South Carolina, Alabama, all with 3 losses. So we've heard it all. But now we're into this season with a schedule that we all agree is much tougher. And for Indiana to repeat a possibility of getting to the college football playoffs, I think we can all sit here and say it's a definite possibility, but the odds may be stacked against Indiana with some key games that are on that schedule. But let's go around again and get everyone's prediction here. Which game for you on the 25 schedule will be the defining game for Indiana this season. And it may be a game for you. It may be a cluster of games, however you want to look at it. What is that for you, Colin? What is that game that is going to have a defining footprint on Indiana's season this year?
Well, I'm glad you picked me first because I feel like there's an obvious answer that all three of us are looking for.
I think they're all, the other two are kind of giving me a dirty look. So I think, and if we agree, that's a great thing too.
Yeah, I think that the Illinois game in week 4 is kind of the big one. You know, I think not only is it kind of the first of a string of big games, but that game in itself it is a matchup between two teams that are kind of on the cusp of being that elite level. And obviously the two teams themselves believe they're on the elite level. But in terms of the grand scheme of the Big Ten, you have Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon. Kind of those are the three big ones. And those are the three teams that are preseason top 10, that have elite players at every level, that are the favorites to make the Big Ten championship. But then you kind of have a second tier. And I think Indiana and Illinois both highlight that second tier where they could definitely get to the Big Ten championship game, but they're going to have to win a couple games that they're not theoretically supposed to as far as odds are concerned. And so it all starts with that game on September 20th in Memorial Stadium, Illinois, Indiana, Luke Altmaier versus Fernando Mendoza. You know, I think that it's going to be a great game. I think that because Indiana has it at home, it really sets it up well for the Hoosiers because then they get Iowa and then they have a bye and then they get Oregon. If that game was on the road at Illinois, it might get a little dicey because if you start out with a loss to Illinois, then you could kind of start to spiral. And I think that's exactly why it's the most important game because, you know, I don't want to say it's a must win, but if Indiana wants to get in the playoff comfortably, it really is a must win. Because if Indiana can't take care of Illinois at home, I have a hard time believing it'll be able to beat Oregon on the road or Penn State on the road. And again, it really would set the tone for the season. And for all the reasons I've mentioned, it just really is a tremendously massive game for both teams. But Indiana more so, the Hoosiers really need to win this one. And I think that just because of the home crowd, I do expect them to win. I have a full Big Ten standings prediction out on the Hoosier.com. You can check that out. I predicted every single schedule and predicted the standings 1 through 18. So feel free to check that out. But as far as my big game, I had to go the Illinois one.
Well, understood. And we know that game is also a sellout at IU as well. And that's a great thing. I know that the first game of the season, by the way, still has some tickets available. I know that Coach Cignetti made reference to that at the freshman orientation there in the stadium a couple days ago about making sure that they would like to have a sellout crowd, as well as the $50 million gift that they received from Merchants Bank of making sure that Merchants Field is packed and rocking for Saturday against Old Dominion. Well, Drew, what is that game for you as well as we look at this schedule? And we know it's the 30th ranked strength of schedule as we speak, heading into the year. What is that game for you?
Yeah, I look at the next week after Illinois. I think Illinois obviously sets the tone for the season, but going to Iowa, it's, you know, a tough place to play. It's no secret. You know, the last, 3-4 years, Iowa's been defined by that offense not having a quarterback. And I think they got their quarterback this year, Mark Gronowski, transfer from South Dakota State. Really good player, so I think he's going to elevate that offense for them. And I think it's going to be a lot tougher of a game that people are looking at. And, the last time Indiana went to Iowa City, I think the last time they played Iowa was 2021, coming to the year, huge expectations. Michael Penix coming off the 2020 season. The belief was through the roof for that Indiana team, and Iowa came in and beat them 34-6. And, it's a tough place to play. It's not going to be an easy game. Coming off that Illinois game, which is going to be tough as well. And then Oregon, you have a bye, but then Oregon after. That game kind of being sandwiched in between makes it really tough. And that 3-game stretch really kind of defines the season, as Colin kind of said. If you go into that season and you lose all 3, you're 3-3. Now you're looking, how can we get bowl eligible? Versus if you go 5-1 with a loss to Oregon, you're like, all right, cool. We are in a great spot to make the college football playoff.
Yeah, that's a great assessment. And I had a video early on when I was doing my season, a breakdown of the schedule. I made that prediction as well that those 3 games were going to have a key impact on Indiana's season. And you have to get off on the right start against Illinois at home, because that is got to be one of those, like Colin referenced, a must win. You get Illinois at home in front of the home crowd, sold out, probably national TV. That's a must win. But again, I agree with the Iowa assessment too. That game to me is a game sandwiched in between 2 powerhouses as well. And Iowa's just kind of hanging around. There are people talking about them, this and that, but Indiana just has not played well at Iowa in a long time. And I think that game you referenced, they were ranked, I think, pretty high that game, and went in there and got their fannies smacked. And that kind of really threw the cold towel on everybody in that season as well. Zach, we'll come to you, my man. I know that you're the last one here. You're probably like, dang it, he took my other one. He took my first one. But it's okay if you pick another same one, because I do think there are some of those going to happen.
Yeah, I'll just talk about that 3-game stretch. It's 4 weeks, 3 games, that Illinois, at Iowa, at Oregon. That's the defining stretch of the season. And obviously that starts with the Illinois game, as Colin said, but that's the defining stretch of that season. And to kind of put it in more of a broad picture for everybody, if you come out of that stretch as IU, if you come out of that 3-game stretch against Illinois, Iowa, and Oregon, and you win 2 out of the 3 of those games, you're in the driver's seat to potentially make a college football playoff. This is a team and a schedule this year with how it's set up for Indiana. Last year, this wasn't the case, but a 2-loss Indiana could make the college football playoff this year. They have a much better case to make the college football playoff as a 2-loss team, as opposed to when they were last year. They really kind of had to be just a 1-loss team heading into the college football playoff selection. So if you go into Illinois, Iowa, and Oregon, you come out of those 3 games, you win 2 of the 3 of those, then all of a sudden you're looking at Penn State is the toughest game on your schedule. You've got Michigan State, UCLA at home. You've got Wisconsin at home. You've got other games that you will be favored in. So if you come out of that 3-game stretch 2-1 and with just 1 loss, then you can afford to lose a game at Penn State and go into the kind of into the season 10-2. Based on the strength of record, based on where Indiana's strength of schedule will likely play out, I think Indiana would have a good shot at making the college football playoff as a 2-loss team. That's why this 3-game stretch is so important. That's what Colin was hinting at. That's what Drew was hinting at with these games, because these are resume-building wins. Not only can you win those games, add your win total, blah, 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 all that, but it's a resume-boosting win. If you go into those places, if you go at Iowa and you win against the defense, that's always going to be great. If you shut down their offense, if you go at Oregon and pull off a miraculous upset there against the preseason top 10 team, that's a resume-boosting win, and you can kind of throw all of those kind of haters off to the side when you come to the end of the season and you're looking at resumes and you're comparing a 2-loss IU team to maybe some 3-loss SEC teams. If Indiana can point to their schedule and say, look, we beat Illinois at home, they were preseason number 12. We beat Iowa or Oregon on the road, they were preseason either top 10 or receiving votes. Indiana can kind of put those doubters and put those haters to rest a little bit come the end of the season. If they can point to the resume, even if it has 2 losses, if they can point to the resume and say, we went 2-1 in that 3-game stretch. So I think it's that stretch overall. Obviously, Colin talked about it, Drew did as well, but that 3-game stretch, it will define Indiana's season.
Yeah, no question. And sorry there, I didn't want to bring that up yet. But anyway, I agree with everyone's assessment that there's no question those 3 games. And to elaborate on your last point there, Zach, even if you go to Oregon and you lose, but it's a tough, tight ball game, and Indiana keeps it tight, or, whatever that scenario is, lose by 7 or 10, say 14 even. With the new metrics out, that would be considered what they would say is a good loss against every other, because you're going to get a strength of record boost because of how you played. Now, if you get blown out, that doesn't help you at all. And that's the one thing that Indiana will have to prevent in this scenario, because if they do come out of that stretch 5-1, but that 1 loss was a what kicking, that's not a good thing, because then they got to go and perform not only the next few games well. That Penn State game becomes even more valuable in the eyes of the college football playoffs in that regard. Now, I agree with everyone there. I'm going to pick something that's totally off the wall here, and I'm going to tell you the reason why, because I do think this team is going to be vastly improved this year. When they played Indiana last year, they were out 10-0 against Indiana before they scored 46 straight points, and they come into Bloomington right after Indiana has gone to Oregon, and that's Michigan State. That quarterback that they have at Michigan State is a very capable quarterback. He's got a lot of upside. He can throw it. He can run it. He does a lot of good things there. Plus, they went out and got some receivers for him this year that is going to make them a very, very viable threat offensively. Now, will they be able to put it all together in year two? We'll see. But that game could be one of those games, depending on what happens at Oregon and Indiana, Iowa, and Illinois. And Indiana comes in 5-1 with a good showing. That game could be a trap game because everything's going right for Indiana at that time. So we'll wait to see there. I believe that everyone kind of hit on all that in terms of that. That's the one thing you guys, you also pointed out, how these wins could be a momentum gainer or a complete derailment. And this is one thing that I think Coach Cignetti has really talked about since he's arrived here. How does the team react when they get punched in the nose? When adversity sets in, how do they handle that? And last year, up until the Ohio State game, they had answered the bell, like that Michigan State game, down 10 points and rattled off 46 straight in East Lansing. But when they went to Ohio State, the wheels fell off. It was the crowd noise. They messed with the snap counts. You had special teams errors. And those are all things that type of adversity, I'm tongue-tied today. That type of adversity is one of those things that Indiana is going to have to overcome and put behind them from last season, especially when they go to Iowa and Oregon State, where theirs are going to be loud crowds. So we'll see what happens. But Michigan State's that game that gives me a little pause based on where they're at in the schedule, but we'll see what happens there. But again, agreed with everything there. And if Indiana is 5-1 coming out of that stretch, they do have a chance to put themselves in front in the control of their own destiny heading into the latter part of the season. Well, let's take that final outtake here, or hot take here after number 3. And this is going to be basically the season outcome prediction. Where is this football team going to finish in 2025? Record, college football playoffs, or, a bowl game for Indiana? Because all those things are on the doorstep before we start playing this year. And what used to be talked about in years past is you got to get to 6 wins, right? Get to that 6 wins. Well, Indiana accomplished that last year in the first 6 weeks, fastest they ever became bowl eligible. So those are the things that when you look at this year, where do you see Indiana? Is it an 8+ win season, or is it 6 or 7 only because they stumble here or there? What are the factors that may or may not make that possible? And the last question in that is, how should Indiana fans measure success in year 2? Because there's no question that the temperature of excitement in and around Bloomington, as well as the entire state of Indiana, is hot right now because of what Indiana accomplished last year and what Scott Dolson has done in the arena of NIL, the big gift from Merchants Bank, as well as hiring Coach DeFries, the men's basketball coach. There is a high fan base out there that's just, chopping at the bit, for success. So we'll take this one here, Zach. In your eyes, what is your prediction for this year's Indiana football team? And, some of the things that will help them or maybe hurt them from not achieving it if they can't.
Yeah, I think this team, I'll just go out and say it. I think this team goes 10-2 this season. I really do. I think this team on paper, I've said it pretty much all fall camp, and all summer. I think this team is more talented than last year's team. And obviously last year's team went 11-1, but this year's team on paper, position by position, player by player, there's more talent on this team. Now, obviously talent doesn't necessarily directly translate to wins, but that's besides the point. I think they go 10-2. I do think they come out of this first kind of tough stretch of the season. I do think they start the year 6-0. I think they beat Illinois at home. If you want to make a college football playoff this year, you have to beat Illinois at home if you're Indiana. Then if you want to make a college football playoff this year again, you probably have to go out on the road and beat Iowa. This is a good Iowa team. This is not a great Iowa team. And who knows what we're going to get and what we're going to see out of Mark Gronowski this season. He could be great. He could be one of the top quarterbacks in the Big Ten, or he could be slightly overhyped. Yes, he was great at South Dakota State. The competition there, it's not Big Ten football. He was not playing against D'Angelo Pons at South Dakota State week in and week out. So I think it'll be interesting to see over the first couple of weeks of the season, how does Gronowski look? How does Iowa look? But I legitimately do think Indiana comes out of the first 6 weeks 6-0. They head to Oregon, play at Autzen, 6-0, probably 2 undefeated teams, or if not a 1-loss team in there with your Oregon. But I think this is an Indiana team. If they go 10-2, based on the strength of record, if they continue to kind of blow out and dominate the teams that they're supposed to, the Old Dominions and non-conference games of the world, if they're winning by multiple scores against the Michigan States, the Marylands, the UCLAs, if they're continuing to do that, like the 56-7 win against Nebraska like last year, if they continue to dominate those teams and do that, you just won't be able to argue with the metrics and with the numbers. A 10-2 Indiana team that is once again one of the top 2 or 3 teams in average margin of victory this season like they were last year. You can't leave that team out of the college football playoff. I'd say because they're Indiana, I'd say probably closer to a 10, 11, 12 seed. I doubt Indiana's going to be hosting unless they are just a 1-loss team. But I do think Indiana makes the college football playoff. And I think the reason because I believe in this team is because, yes, they won 11 games last year. They made the college football playoff. But there has not been a chip taken off any of these players' shoulders. When I was talking to Mikhail Kamara at Media Days in Las Vegas back in the summer, he said that he told me Derek Owings, the strength and conditioning coordinator for Indiana, was playing the Notre Dame fight song during offseason workouts. This team remembers that Notre Dame game. They remember that Ohio State game. They don't want those to be repeated. So when they go into a game against Illinois, they go into a road game against Iowa, Oregon, Penn State, those reminders and those feelings post Ohio State, post Notre Dame, those will be fresh on the minds of all of these Hoosiers, and I think they will come out. They still have that chip on their shoulder. This is still a Curt Cignetti coach team. I don't see, yes, Michigan State's probably a trap game. Yes, there's some difficult kind of road games. Maryland won't be a walk in the park on the road. But I think this team and their head coach and their mentality won't let slip-ups happen. I think Indiana wins the games they're supposed to. They take care of business in those games, and I think they make the college football playoff at 10-2.
All righty. Zach is in for 10-2. And just a reminder, ESPN's FPI, we'll talk a little bit about this if we got time after we get through with some of this. They have Indiana at 8.1 wins this year. So you can see they have about a 12% chance via ESPN of making college football playoffs. And if you talk to Paul Feinbaum, they have no chance in hell of making the college football playoffs. And last year was a complete fluke for Coach Cignetti. I paraphrase there a little, but that's essentially what he said. Drew, what do you got for Indiana's overall record this year?
Yeah, I've kind of gone back and forth between 8 and 10 wins, like that kind of 8, 9, 10. I'm gonna go 9. Kind of go right in the middle just because I've been on that both ends of it. I think you look at Oregon, Penn State, those are going to be 2 brutal games. I think Indiana's going to be, right on the cuffs of 10 wins, and it's going to be, a playoff bubble team where if you get 10-2, they probably get in. If they're 9-3, they're probably on the wrong side of the bubble. But I think you asked what success looks like. I want to see how Indiana plays against, the powerhouses. How do they look against Oregon? How do they look against Penn State? Because last year, they stepped on the field and, against Notre Dame, Ohio State. They lost both those games badly. And they got outmatched physically, especially in the trenches. Indiana made a big effort this offseason to load up, adding Pat Coogan, bringing back Khalil Benson, Zen Michalski. This team is looking to get better in the trenches because, Curt Cignetti saw what happened last year in the college football playoff and against Ohio State. So how, they're able to hold up against, the powerhouses of the Big Ten, that's going to kind of determine what success looks like. but I go to that 9-win mark. I think, they're going to be right around that, whether it's 8-4, 9-3, or 10-2. That's kind of where my ballpark has been.
Yeah, that's a reasonable observation there. And it's not, not to say that we don't want that to be the case and we want Indiana to have the best chance to win, but you have to look objectively at the table. And sometimes, this is the hardest part about trying to predict the season when you haven't played a game and you really don't know what they got, because it's not like you're out of practice every day observing. You get maybe an hour of practice, if that, and then a 20-minute press conference where not much is said. So it's hard sometimes to make those predictions and everything. Colin, how do you see your Hoosiers figuring out this year from your perspective?
I agree with Drew and I agree with Zach that it's either 10-2 or 9-3. I would be surprised if they went 11-1. I would also be surprised if they went 8-4. I think that the 8.5 over/under win total for Indiana is an over. I would say that. I think that 9 wins is kind of the benchmark for success. I think that anything under, and I would say the majority of the student body, the majority of the alumni, the fans would consider that not necessarily a failure of a season, but a disappointing season. And so as far as my prediction goes, I do think that they will win at Iowa. I think that it's going to be ugly. That game is probably not going to be a pretty game as far as Indiana is concerned, but I do think they escape with a win just because I feel like Indiana ran into 2 problems in those 2 games against Ohio State and Notre Dame. One of which is that they couldn't really move the ball offensively on the road. And I think that eventually the defense got worn down. And I think that Iowa isn't necessarily going to wear the Indiana defense down. They're not an explosive offense. Mark Gronowski is obviously an improvement over quarterbacks they've had in the past. But I think that Indiana's defense is improved, and I think it's good enough to where even if the offense doesn't play as well in a road environment like it did last season, the defense is good enough to get that win. And I do think that at Oregon and at Penn State are 2 losses that you are going to take. But 10-2 puts you at that bubble of the college football playoff. I would have to do an entire prediction of the entire country to decide whether 10-2 is good enough. Because as we've seen last year, 10-2 Tennessee was ranked ahead of 11-1 Indiana. And so the College Football Playoff Selection Committee has a history of disrespecting Indiana because of the strength of schedule, specifically the non-conference strength of schedule. And it hasn't gotten any better this season. So I will have to see how the rest of the season plays out. But I do think that 10-2 puts you in a great position to make the college football playoff. Most likely will get you in, but you'd really have to see how the rest of the country plays out. And I think 10-2, whether or not they make the playoff, fans will be satisfied. Curt Cignetti will never admit that he's satisfied with the 10-2 record, but as far as Indiana football is concerned, 10-2 record after an 11-1 season is truly phenomenal. You have to look at the big picture, and Indiana football is a program that has the most losses in college football history. So to even be at 10 wins, regardless of a playoff appearance, it really is special. And what Cignetti's, what he's building is really bigger than himself and bigger than the program. He's building a culture of students and of an entire university that is gravitating towards football. And it obviously did not used to be that way. And so I think that this season is important not only for records and what happens on the field, but what happens off the field with just the culture that is being built in the city of Bloomington. And I think it'll be really special to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, and the only thing that helps Indiana from a resume perspective on last year's season, they did lose to the national champion and the runner-up, per se. So if you look at it from that perspective, not too many teams didn't beat those guys either. So that's the one thing they have going there. And, I kind of see everyone's point here. Is a 10-2 a realistic goal for this team? Absolutely. It is. It's not unattainable in my opinion. So I kind of see that side of the equation. But I also see the side of the equation with this schedule and how it's playing out in the Big Ten, that 9-3 is a benchmark that this team could be a fallback position if things don't go as well. And I think what Indiana fans have to look in how they measure success this year, anything over 8 wins, irregardless of college football playoffs, is a hell of a year for an Indiana football team after coming off a historic season. Now, does that mean they're going to get 8 wins? No, I don't think they will. And that may be the disappointment that you were talking about there, Colin, if that were to happen. So I see it as a 9-3, 10-2 team. If you had to put my feet to the fire, I would say 10-2. So I would deal with Zach, and this team would be on the cusp of getting back in the college football playoffs. So that's what I think. And that's what I think is a realistic expectation. As we know, goals become adjustable as you go through the season. So we may have to come back here in the middle of the year and reshuffle the deck per se, but we'll see what all happens there when it comes to this 2025 season for this Indiana team. You know, we've sit here and talked about 3 of the hottest topics that you can think about heading into a 2025 football season. Indiana replacing a bunch of guys from last year. That's been one of the talking points about how many guys left this program after last season. I think that's going to be more of a trend in college football because the transfer portal, you're going to get older players that maybe are one and done type of deal. They fail to realize that they also brought in some of the most productive players that they could with, Mendoza and Hemby, and you can just go right down the list of that type of group of players. But as we wrap up this kind of hot take segment here, what is the one word that you would put your thumb on for this Indiana football team heading into the 2025 season? And that is just from your observation of body language, how people are handling themselves, all the philosophical approaches to evaluating some team. How is that, one word for you that you think defines this football team this year? Zach, we'll head back to you on this one again.
I'm going to go my one word as capable. This is a team that is capable of making the college football playoff. They have the mindset to do that. They have the talent to do that. They have the guys, the players, the coaching staff to do that. They are capable of making the college football playoff. They are capable of winning some of these tough road games that we've been talking about over the last handful of minutes. So I'm going to go with capable. I think all the pieces are in place. It's just a matter of Indiana actually going out on the field and proving just how capable they actually are.
All right, Drew, how about you? One word that you think is a defining word for this team.
Zach, you actually said my word. It's proof. I think it's about proving it. They've heard all last season it was a Cinderella run. It was a fluke. They didn't belong in the college football playoff. All off season, Indiana, there's been so much noise surrounding the program about how they didn't belong, how they got lucky. The schedule opened up for them the way it did. They are not that good. And this is, their chance to prove it, come back with a tougher schedule, new quarterback, Cignetti, he's heard all the noise. He's bought into all the noise, into the fire that's kind of been surrounding this program. And, these guys, they want to prove it. They want to prove that they're not just like a one-time thing last year. They're going to go back to the college football playoff and compete with the best programs in the country again.
Okay. And then, Colin, how about you? That one word that you think.
Drew, I have a similar take to you. My one word is persistence. I think that if Indiana football can be persistent as a top program in this country for the next, let's say, 2, 3, 4 years, I think that'll make a world of difference. Not necessarily for a result standpoint. Obviously, those are huge, hanging a banner, hanging a college football playoff banner, a Big Ten championship, potentially, a college football playoff championship, potentially. But Scott Dolson said it. Renovations are coming. The stadium is changing. The program is changing. The landscape of college athletics are changing. We saw it with Merchants Bank, $50 million to the pockets of Indiana's athletic department. That number could add a 0 in the next 10, 20 years if Indiana football can be persistent about this success. If it's just 1 year and the Hoosiers go 6-6 this year, obviously we'll all have the memories. The players will appreciate what they did. The fans will remember it fondly, but the momentum will be over. There will be no more money flowing in to the program. It'll just kind of not necessarily go away, but it'll kind of plateau, and Indiana football will not necessarily go back to extreme mediocrity, but the momentum will fizzle out. And so I think that being persistent on the minds of everyone in the college football world, whether that's ESPN, Fox, you name it, Indiana football is on their minds currently before the season starts. And this season will define if they're persistent in that, in making the strides to becoming an elite level college football team. That's what Cignetti wants. That's what the fans want. But a season of 10-2 or better, I think will determine that.
Yeah. And I think you guys have got all words that, exemplify the mindset of Curt Cignetti when he talks to this team, and he has a unbelievable way of getting a team that he's coaching into that tunnel vision mentality. And the word that I think describes Indiana from a 30,000 feet perspective, because you guys are on the campus, you get that feeling, you're around the players, you get their take, in that regard. And sometimes you guys have better insight because you're on the same level in some respects. When you talk to them, they give you more of an truer answer than maybe talking to anyone else. But focus is what this team always has. It seems that Curt Cignetti has made that mentality of having that focus to play the game in a fast, resilient mindset. In his terms, are fast, physical, and relentless. And I think last year that proved it, the way they went through the schedule and the ability for them to play the next play. That's the one thing that I saw them do last year, play the next play. And they never got caught back thinking of what previously had happened. So focus to me sums that up. And I do think we have all given a pretty rounded opinion and perspective of what this year is looking like for Indiana. And just a couple things here. I wanted to see if I can get this up from our partners over at Bet GM. I'm having a terrible time tonight, fellas. In the Old Dominion game, and hopefully you guys may be able to see this a little bit better. But I've got right now, we're in Old Dominion week. We're going into it right now. Indiana's a 22.5 point favorite, over under 54.5. Money line 11 plus 1150 for Old Dominion, minus 2,500. And you can see some of the different deals there. A lot of people, 92% right now, are laying the points in this game, which I found a little bit interesting, because if you look at Old Dominion, and I'm going to have more about this coming this week, this is a team that's gone on the road and been pretty good against P4 teams and beat Virginia Tech and had some other great wins and played South Carolina really tough a year ago. And Grant Wilson was the quarterback in that game. And then you can see below there the odds of being a Big Ten championship winner, and Indiana is right there at plus 3,500 and tied with Nebraska, but has they believe a better betting chance than Iowa, Illinois, and some of the rest. So it's an interesting dynamic when you bring that equation into it and see what the odds are laying out there in Vegas, and think bet MGM for Sportsbook for those numbers and such. But again, everybody's excited for 2025. And before we go here, in a one quick through segment here, as we get about 6 minutes here. Thoughts on what is the next step for the playoffs? Is it going to 16, or are we going to see the craziness of going to 24 teams as Tony Petetti has projected at the Big Ten, which I stumbled coming out because I almost think that's a ridiculous number to go to. What's your thoughts on that, Drew? We go to 16 here in a few years. Does we see some schedule changes now? The SEC's gone to 9 games, and does Indiana have to go back and say, hey, Virginia, you don't want to come back on our schedule?
Yeah, I think eventually we're going to get to 16 pretty soon, and then eventually probably 24. I really like the 12-team playoff. If it was up to me, I'd keep it. I think, you get the 12 best teams, and there's a gap between the top 12, it feels like, and the rest of the top 25. So for personal preference, obviously, I'd prefer the 12-team playoff to stay. I really liked it last year. I like how they changed the seating, so there's no more, automatic bye weeks. But I do think, it's all about money in the end of the day. We all know it. It's business. The NCAA, the SEC, the Big Ten, they want to make as much money as possible, and more games means more money. So eventually I do think we'll get to that 24.
Okay, Colin, how about you? We go to 16, or do you think we make the double the pleasure and double the fun and head to 24? Go ahead, Colin. You hear me?
I think Drew's right. I think 16 is coming soon, and then 24 right after that. I think that, like he said, it's about money, and, the playoff, while it might not be popular, people will still watch, and that's all that matters. It'll get great viewership. It'll include more programs, which means more fans will end up being interested, and it won't even just affect the playoff. It'll affect the regular season, because an expanded playoff means more teams are in the playoff hunt at the end of the regular season. It'll keep more fan bases engaged. It'll, just excite the entire college football world. Now, Drew said he likes the 12-team playoff. Personally, I think that they should have gone with an 8-team playoff. I think 8 would have been absolutely perfect. I don't think that there should have been auto bids in a potential 8-team playoff. I think should have just been 1 through 8, 8 best teams, play it out, because you saw in the 4-team era that 5th or 6th team really had a case and probably should have had a chance to play for a title. I think anything after 8, that's a bit of a stretch. Indiana was the 8th ranked team in the CFP rankings last year. Obviously, they were the 10th seed because auto bids jumped them in seeding. But I think last year it was hard to argue for any team after Indiana in the rankings had a true shot of making a national championship run. So that's my 2 cents. Obviously, it doesn't mean anything because they'll never go to 8 teams. But 16 is coming soon. 24 is coming after that. And I'd watch out. A Big Ten SEC scheduling alliance might be in the future. That would make a lot of money for both conferences. Curt Cignetti hinted at it. And I think that while the two sides act like they're opposing each other, they really want the same thing, and that's more money in their pockets.
Zach, how about you, my man? Where do you see the CFP heading here in the near future?
Yeah, I think you guys have both hit it on the head. We'll get to 16 in a year or two. We'll get to 24 teams a year or two after that. And I think we'll probably lean towards a model of more automatic qualifiers and probably potentially play-in games at some point. I think just anything that gives the college football playoff and all the stakeholders within that more money. Play-in games would do that. Those big-time games against the top 2, 3, 4 teams in each conference, specifically the SEC and the Big Ten. But I too agree. I mean, the Big Ten's going to have to do something at some point to kind of bolster that non-conference schedule. They're going to have to bring back that requirement that every team's got to play a Power 4 team, because right now with what the SEC has done in 2026, they're going to start playing technically 10 Power Conference games each season, with the 9 conference games plus the required 1 out of conference. So the Big Ten is going to have to adopt a rule where they have to require teams to play an out of conference Power 4 team. And I think the easiest way to accomplish that is probably just by going and doing a partnership with the SEC, because it was funny, Coach, you brought up the Virginia game that was canceled by Indiana. At this point, if Indiana were to put Virginia back on the schedule, there'd still be people that were hating on Indiana and saying, well, Virginia's not a good enough Power Conference team. So at this point, I think it's just got to be the SEC and the Big Ten, because the ACC, after Clemson, maybe Louisville, some of those top 2 or 3 teams, there's a real fall off in the ACC. Same goes for the Big 12. So I think what makes the most sense and what would make the most people happy as far as, leveling the actual schedules is concerned would be an alliance, a partnership between the Big Ten and the SEC.
Yeah, and I agree with all your guys' take on this. In a lot of ways, I do think 16 is a fairly reasonable number of teams, having been involved at lower levels of the NCAA where we had these number of playoffs and stuff. The one thing I caution of, we got to remember, this is still college athletics, and these kids are still quote unquote student athletes. And when you jump the number of games up, That's another week that's potentially out of school and things of that nature. And you creeping into that after January time period as well. So it does create some scheduling issues when it comes to the calendar. That being said, I do believe you're correct. What I think you're going to see with the scheduling, I do think you're going to see like the SEC, Big 10, ACC, Big 12, but I do see some rotational aspects there as well, where you get that conference matchup games each and every year, kind of like they do in basketball, where they have the Big 10 and the ACC preseason games out in New York or whatever. But I do see that coming as well. And I do think Coach Cignetti will have no problem adding a P4 team into the mix as long as everybody's on the same schedule, playing 9 conference games and going from there as well. Well, hey, guys, I want to thank you for joining me here today as we get ourselves ready for 2025 and this Indiana Hoosier team that's coming off a remarkable Cinderella season. I guess you could say 11-2, but you know what? As Coach Cignetti said at the beginning of this press conference in Vegas, that was last year. Take every picture off the wall, take everything that was earned by that team, because this team has yet to do anything, and their first test is coming up this week at Old Dominion. Remember to head over to thehoosier.com, get that subscription, $1 off, $1 for the first month, 50% for the rest of the year, and you get a lot more for your dollar than anywhere else on the internet, especially with these 3 guys covering Indiana athletics from A to Z. I want to thank Drew, Zach, and Colin. And before we go here, let's go ahead and give you guys a plug for your own podcast as well, as this is a cross collaboration. And we want to make sure that people understand where they can get all the coverage of Indiana athletics. So Drew and Zach and Colin, go ahead with any of those plugs that you guys need to make for your own.
Sure, you got it.
Yeah, I can start. Guys, subscribe to the Hoosier. Make sure you're following me, Zach, Colin, also Kyler and Alec on Twitter. And checking, the Hoosier On3 YouTube page, because, Hoosier Tailgate's on there, talking about the Hoosiers, bunch of other stuff, In Touch with Indiana Sports with John Alden. So full coverage of all things Indiana sports and much more than that too on the site. So make sure you're checking that stuff out.
What is the name of your podcast that you guys have so that people understand that as well?
Talking about the Hoosiers.
Talking about the Hoosiers. Okay. Yep. That's what I thought I heard, but I want to make sure. And Colin, anything with you, young man?
Nothing for me other than what Drew said. We all have our Twitter handles next to our names down there. So, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to the YouTube, subscribe to thehoosier.com. It really is the pinnacle of coverage for Indiana athletics. You don't get much better anywhere else.
Well, we want to thank our affiliate tonight sponsoring all this, Academy Sports and Outdoors. You can go to academy.com/C/backpack to get in on all the different options you have there for all your needs in terms of A to Z. In some respects, a lot of tailgate items, just like the Hoosier Tailgate talks about each and every week. For Colin McMahon, Zach Browning, Drew Rosenberg, I'm the coach, Shannon Griffith. This has been the Hoosier Football Tailgate right here on thehoosier.com.